Hello and welcome everybody to another exciting episode of Side Talks 2.0. As always, my name is Dr. Jack Saxenia, and today I have an amazing guest today to talk about one of my most interested topics of science and medicine, near-death experiences. Today's guest has experienced this not once but twice, and he will tell us what he felt, what he went through, and the experience he had during these uh, moments, and from that what he's learned and what he's able to communicate with us. It's really a fascinating story, and I'm excited to hear about the details and discuss how this leads into our understanding of the human mind and the human brain. So without further ado, I want to introduce Mr. Peter Panagore, and I will let him introduce himself about his background, and then we'll get started on the topic. Peter, please go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate you having me here today. And I'd let your audience know that our earlier conversation that preceded this recording was fascinating. So I think we're off to a good start already. I'm Peter Panagore. Let's see, where do I begin? I had a near-death experience when I was 21 years old. I was ice climbing in Alberta, Canada, and I died of hypothermia. And in 2015, the day after I ran 5K, kind of a fitness guy, I had a congenital family heart attack, and I died in the ambulance on the way to the medical center catheterization lab. And so my life has changed as radically as a result of these two things. In terms of my upbringing, I was raised Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox simultaneously. I spent time as a born again Christian, charismatic. I had a bit of a transcendental experience on mescaline when I was in high school. I have an English degree from the University of Massachusetts, a Master's of Divinity from Yale Divinity School with an emphasis in mysticism. Spent 18 years as an ordained pastor in the coast of Maine and Connecticut, dealing with outrageously difficult situations. And the last 15 years on television, I had a spot on two NBC stations in Maine as a morning host of a inspirational time slot just before the weather, bringing hope and inspiration to like 100,000 folks a day. So it's been an interesting ride so far. I'm a published author. I'm a best-selling author for Audible and a bunch of other stuff. I could go on and on and on, but I'll say the most interesting thing that I like to do is I like to stilt walk in parades.
Wow. That's fun. I haven't heard of that one before. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Right after my near-death experience, the first one, I was at Montana State University as an exchange student and toured nationally in a theater company as a mime, and I continued studying mime as part of my education as an undergraduate.
Wow.
And but it's hard to stay as a mime. It's hard to be fit enough to do it. And stilt walking is super easy entertainment. And I had this buddy who's in theater who was trying to get me to go back into mime again. But it turns out he was a stilt walker. And I said, well, why don't you teach me? So he taught me, and I began stilt walking. I just do local parades. I don't like go to New York City or Chicago, but it's a hoot. It's wicked fun.
That's an interesting hobby, or sometimes a good gig to have on the side.
It's fun. It's fun for kids. I do it mostly in my communities that where I live on the coast of Maine, as an entertainer. That's why I do it, for entertainment for everybody.
So if there's anybody from Hollywood watching, they can take you in for a movie role somewhere.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Oh, I just signed a contract with for my second book with a couple of major Hollywood producers for a feature film that we're deep into development now.
Wow, that's exciting. I mean, hopefully we'll get a little bit of taste about what the movie will be about based on the experiences you'll tell us. So can we start from the first experience that you had? And I know the audience is really looking forward to hearing about the details about what you felt, what transpired, and why you thought you were dead. I mean, there's a lot of skeptics saying, were you actually dead? I mean, there's stuff happening in the brain that we don't understand. So it could have been one of those phenomena.
Well, I'll give you a little background. And before I begin, I was a Boy Scout till I was almost 18. A lot of winter camping, a lot of backpacking led me into mountaineering. I was a skier since I was 7 years old, and I was a member of the National Ski Patrol working at Bridger Bowl, which is a ski resort outside of Bozeman, Montana at the time. So a lot of backpacking, a lot of winter experience, cross-country skiing, all that kind of stuff. So that's just background info. I was an exchange student at Montana State University. I didn't want to go back home to Boston for spring break. And I found a guy in the outdoor club, of which I was a member and also a leader, leading trips to go on a 10-day snow caving and 1-day ice climbing trip in British Columbia and Alberta, Canada.
Which I heard is really beautiful.
Oh, really, really beautiful. One of my dreams is to ride a motorcycle down the Ice Fields Parkway.
Wow.
So I'm going to leave out a lot of what happened to me, why I ended up dying in terms of the details of the process of ice climbing and dying from it, just because it takes a long time to tell the tale. But basically, this is the setup. After 7 days or 8 days snow caving, we had 1 day climbing. I was a mountain climber, rock climber, technical climber, but not an ice climber. My climbing partner, backpacking partner, Tim, was a certified lead climber for ice and rock. And this was my first ice climb. He had all the gear. I had to borrow all the gear that I had, and I came up short in my equipment. I had an axe and a hammer to make this 500 or 600 foot climb. Normally you need 2 axes. And as a result of this, the hammer is much shorter. The axe is much taller, and you can place your axe, let go of your axe and hang on a strap around your wrist and rest. But you can't do that with a hammer. You got to grip the hammer the whole time with your forearm, strength of muscles. And that slowed my climb down significantly. So by the time we reached the top of the climb, and there'd been maybe, I don't know, 9 other teams climbing the same face that same day. By the time we reached the top of the climb at sunset, it was March and there was 10 feet of snow on the ground, and we're like a long day's drive from the Arctic Circle, and it's cold. And the sun went down, the teams left. We were still on the top of the climb, not dressed for overnight because it's a day climb. Nobody was dressed for overnight. We didn't bring up any of our gear. And as soon as we reached the top of the climb, we knew that we were in trouble before we reached the top of the climb. But when we reached the top of the climb, hypothermia set in. And so this is a story of the processes of hypothermia in which I was trained. I was the first responder guy on this trip. That was part of my responsibility, was to look out for our well-being. And so I was able to, because of my training, understand and know what the stages were that we were going through as we were going through them. So this is the scene. We're about 500 or 600 feet up on this 10,000 foot climb, 10,000 foot mountain. We can see the Saskatchewan River right across the street from the Icefields Parkway, which is maybe 70 yards away from the rock face, and there's a parking lot. So we're high up. We're not that high up, but we're high enough that we're in serious trouble because there's no way to get off of this thing unless you rappel. And the only way to rappel off this was to traverse to get to the rappel spots in order to descend 3 pitches. So when we're sitting at the top of this cliff, the sun goes down, temperature drops about 30 degrees instantly, boom, like that.
Wow.
We're soaked to the skin because it's a wet sport. Ice is falling down your back as you're chipping ice, and it's super fun. Okay, climbing requires hyper-focused concentration. You have to be completely present where you are when you're there. You can't let your mind drift off on anything else, and you need to be able to be super level-headed. And so, no fear. If you have fear, everybody has fear, but you have to be able to control your fear and stay calm. Force yourself into a calm state. So we get to this, we're sitting up there, sun goes down, other teams leave, we pull up the rope, it's a double rope, 200, 300 foot line, and it becomes this huge knot because we're kind of laying it too fast. because we got to get out of there. As soon as we sit down, my jaw starts to clatter. My whole body starts to violently shake with, I got shivers, but not like I'm shivering. I get a little shiver, but like violent shivers. And my jaw is clattering so much that I can't control it. And my partner, Tim, he's sitting right next to me, and we knew that we were in serious trouble. And so we discussed spending the night kind of canoodled up against the cliff. You can see this curtain behind me. Maybe twice the distance behind us was with the face itself, and there was no shelter. There was nowhere to go inside anything. So we discussed like snuggling up together, but we were both so cold already that there was no heat. My heat would not have given him any heat, and vice versa.
Right.
So we realized pretty immediately that we were going to die if we stayed there. We knew if we stayed, we would die. And we knew that if we tried to get off the mountain, we might not die. And so we decided might not instead of would. And so we harnessed it. We tied each other off on the rope to make our traverse. We made a series of rappels, first rappel, second rappel, and I'm leaving out all the things that happened in between. By the time we got to the top of the third rappel, my feet were so frozen, they were unbendable. Our lips it was very difficult to speak. We'd gone through the stages. Began to lose our cognitive abilities. Our brains were freezing. We lost our coordination.
Mm-hmm.
We were only speaking essentially when it was essential to speak, because every step we took drained our inner resources, our energy levels. Both of us were skinny young guys, and so we didn't have a lot of. I got a little more resources on me these days. I didn't have any resources on me in those days, and so our bodies were already felt like to me beginning to tap into my muscles in order to consume itself. I don't really know was true, ketosis, but it seemed that way to me. What I knew was true was that, and here's the scene. We come down this rock face because we're off the ice, and we turn a corner and we're on a ledge, and Tim's to my left and I'm to his right, and in the ledge in front of us are two iron pins. They're maybe 10 or 15 feet apart, with rings on them and permanently installed nylon harness straps with carabiners that we hooked to our harnesses. So Tim was hooked to my left, I was hooked to the right, and I had the rope. And I took off my gloves. I still have frost. You see this? I have a little Band-Aid on today. Okay, because I have residual frostbite issues, and my fingers split. And my fingers split this morning, and it's just one of those things. And so I had to take my gloves off again. Tied the rope to my harness, took the other end of the line, two ends of the line, called a bitter end, and I tossed the bitter end out to the side in order to pull the rope through the ring, which was 100, 150 feet above us. The rope got stuck on the very first pull, just like this. And what I imagine is that there was some kind of V, and the rope was in the middle of these Vs. I don't know, some rocky crag thing jammed on the first pull, and I couldn't get it free. And now it's the middle of the night. It's like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. I don't really know what time it is. I don't have a watch on. I'm not really paying attention to that. But the rope was so short at this position that if I untied it and tried to hand it to Tim to help, he couldn't reach it. And so there was no. And if I untied it and tried to have him help, right, exactly. So my job was to pull on the rope. And so we're stuck here. And now I've gotten to the place where I get hot. My body feels like it gets hot. And I know better because I was working a ski patrol. You don't unzip your coat and take your clothes off. People who are dying of hypothermia often take their clothes off. And so I unzipped my coat, and Tim told me, don't unzip your coat. I was like, no, I'm hot. I'm unzipping my coat. I know better, but I'm still doing it, which of course made my temperature drop faster. And so around this time, I knew that we were not getting out of this. I'd been being driven forward by my fear and by my desire for survival all night long. And I remember being looking off to the mountain there's the river, and then there's a mountain across the way, and it is so beautiful. There's 10 million stars in the sky, with
Mhm.
like a 3/4 moon. And suddenly, instead of wanting to drive myself forward, I accepted the fact that I was not going to get out of this situation. It was too late. I knew that my hyperthermia was too far advanced. The rope was stuck. There's no way. So I became peaceful. I accepted that I was going to die, and I started thinking about my family, and I started thinking about God, and I began to fall asleep. And when I would fall asleep, my knees would give way from underneath me, and I'd collapse and smack on the rock. I had a helmet on, and wake back up and stand back up and yank on the rope. And that happened several times. And then I stood back up this one time. And as I stood up this time, my peripheral vision, last stage, became tunnel vision. Had like this big, huge blackness over my peripheral vision in a circle. And as I stood there, this rapidly closed. And I was looking around. I'd never seen such a thing before. And I watched my vision go like that. And it went completely dark. And I thought, I must be falling asleep.
Mhm.
But no, I'm still conscious. Why am I still conscious? Why did it go black? Why am I still conscious? I don't understand what's going on. I didn't feel myself collapse. I didn't feel myself hit the rock, which I knew these things had happened because they had happened repeatedly.
Mhm.
And the next thing I knew, this blackness became expansive. It went from flat, plain black, like looking in a dark room, to looking in a dark room that suddenly, somehow or other, even though it's completely dark, you can see everything. You can see like the depth of the darkness. And way far, far in the distance was like a pinprick of light. And this is all metaphor. Okay, everything I say from here on out, I've constructed language in order to talk about it. So there's like a pinprick of light that came rushing toward me at an impossible speed, faster than light speed, and it communicated to me a whole bunch of things: intelligence, like pure intelligence, power, capacity, and it communicated to me, "I'm taking you." And it rushed towards me at this impossible speed. And as it spoke to me inside me without language, I communicated back and said, I don't know what this is. I don't know who you are. I don't understand any
This
of this.
isn't word communication, right? You're just
No,
experiencing it.
yes, there's no language. There's no language at all. It's like this knowledge enters into me without without language, and I refuse to go. I put up all of my strength of my willpower that I'd used all night long, that I dug incredibly deep inside myself, my the strength of my character, and it was like I was nothing. It was like I was a an ant battling an elephant, and it just grabbed me and just took me. And in the midst of my resistance, and as soon as I was taken, I went from this resistance to this comfort. Suddenly, instantaneously, I'm enveloped, and I can sort of see this from outside and inside at the same time. And I'm carried by this I call my angel of death now, but there's no wings and there's no face. It's just energy. It's intelligence, and it with of incredible capacity, and it carries me and lifts me and carries me up the tunnel. The proverbial, everybody talks about the tunnel, but this expansive darkness stays expansive and yet somehow narrows also simultaneously, paradoxically, into this narrow space. And I go off with this entity, in whose arms I am comforted. And the next thing I know, I've traveled an incredible distance that it's indescribable, and I sort of pop out into another infinite darkness that's illuminated. And so there's always these opposites going on. So it's an infinite darkness, and yet it's illuminated because I can see, and I have no eyes, I have no body. I find myself alone in this vastness, unafraid. Um, and my first experience of it was, this is me. This is who I am. And I feel like I describe it as an orb of consciousness 10,000 times bigger than my body, and no brain in the way of my thinking. I'm completely calm and at ease, and I can see in every direction at once, like I have 10,000 eyes, or I'm a singular one big eye. And it seems like my seeing and my thinking and my understanding and my knowledge are all, and myself are all one thing. It's not like my sense is separate from my understanding, which is separate from my thinking. It's all this one thing. And I know that I'm this, and I'd never been that, Peter. And I'm sort of floating in this infinite vastness, and like a portal opens, like an opening tears open in this, or opens up in this, and there's a shimmering flow over the opening that's transparent and translucent at the same time. So I can see through this, and yet I can see it as a flowing solid. And there's this another tunnel, this other tunnel that goes off way to this far distance. And I reach with because it's beautiful. I reach with myself, and I touch it with myself. And when I touch this flow with myself, I get infilled with what I use all these different words to describe. It's all life. When I say all life, I mean like all life of all things everywhere, all the time. All life, all love, all beauty, all joy, all knowledge, all intellect, all
You
understanding.
somewhat struggling to tell the exact feeling you had, and you can't find the adjectives in the English language to describe it. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. And so I use a I use a whole list of them. I summarize. Okay, my summary word is love.
Love.
But that's not completely accurate either, because this love contains knowledge and intellect and knowing and living, and it's all these things all in one. And it infills me, and as it infills me, and I tell this in a sequence of events, but I'm in timelessness. So there's no future, there's no past. It's like all time exists. Have you come across the concept of block time? It's a new it's like block time, similar to that. And uh, so I'm living in this timelessness, and this infills me, and all these things happen at the same time. I get, I see my origin of my creation. I hear my soul name, like the word that was spoken, no tongues, no lips, no words, no concept, but like a word that was spoken that called me into beingness. I saw that my soul self was this pinprick, like a singular photon, that's superpositioned, that's both light and wave at the same time, and it's created and called into being, part of and similar to, but separate from, all this incredibly large, infinitely immense amount of light. So I am like light from light, and I see the long tail of my everlasting soul from the moment of my being called into being. I see these sort of like physical experiences inside my soul. My soul is much bigger than these little tiny lives that I lived, but I can't see now what those were. But they were so small and minuscule and immaterial to the essence of my beingness. I then understood that I was creature. Not Peter, not like I'm a creature, but Peter is like an expression of creaturehood. But my soul was a creature. My soul was created, and I was in the presence of Creator. And I went through, uh, as Peter, in order kind of like to shed my Peterness. I went through all of the pain I'd ever given everyone in my entire life. So I had a life review in a sequence of events beginning with childhood, where every time I intended to hurt somebody, I experienced the pain that I gave them from their point of view. And it turned out that I didn't just give it to them, I gave it to myself every single time I gave it away. All the unintended pain I gave away, and all of my justifications for causing all of this pain. And I self-judged as guilty. that I had caused all this pain
Mhm.
and I had no reason to do so. And meanwhile, this infinite darkness in which I was sort of manifested into a voice that, with no sound, that was speaking inside me, that contained all love and was saying, I know you. I've always known all these things about you. I created you. Look how I created you. You're my creature. I love you. I forgive you. I love you. It's not your fault that you created these instances of pain. You made choices to create them, but it's the function of living in the world that creates the
Necessity.
necessity
Uh,
for causing pain. You just can't live in the world without causing pain. And I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you. And it seemed to me that in addition to all of the pain that I carried with me, that all of the love I'd given away in my life and all of the love that was given to me was also my treasure. And that somehow, because of that, I was able to turn to face the unfaceable light, because this was inside of me and outside of me. But I have this idea in my head that if I had a face, which I didn't, I turned it to look at the light. And in the turning to look at the light and facing my own gifts of suffering that I gave to people, the forgiveness
mm.
banished and eliminated all of the suffering I'd ever given away. And so suddenly, instantaneously, I went from suffering. And all the pain was like 10,000 times greater than I ever gave away. So each instance of pain was immensely greater than what I had thought I had given away.
So all the senses are hyperactive, the good, the bad, and everything.
Yes, exactly so. And then I was healed. No more suffering, no more pain, wholeness, cleansed. I use Catherine of Genoa's language to describe it as the purgative fire of divine love. I use Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol when Marley comes with his chains. I forged these chains link by link in my life. All those were gone. They were eliminated from me. And in the elimination, it was sort of like this cleansing occurred, which allowed all this. And here's my whole list of adjectives, descriptives. As one thing, these are all we experience in this world, these things as separate, but they were oneness: love, beauty, joy, understanding, knowledge, intellect, intelligence, compassion, bliss, awe, paradise, adoration. And all these things were forgiveness. They were all oneness. And this oneness infilled me and expanded me to the capacity of my consciousness, or my soul's ability to contain all of this oneness of being. And I was people talk about being blissed out. It's being blissed out times a million, times a trillion. It's so not here. It's just indescribable. And so I was blessed. And when this was finally infilled to the limit of my capacity, and it felt to me at the time like if one more molecule was of this experience was added into me, I would have obliterated and gone back into, I would have obliterated. I would have not been non-being. And that's the other thing too. This is a place of no thing. I should have said that in the beginning. This is a place of no thing. People are like, well, God's nothing. Well, yeah. I don't know how else to describe it. These are all things. This is a thing. That's a thing. I'm a thing. You're a thing. That's a thing. This is a place where there are no things. And because there are no things, nothing.
Non-physicality, but present there at the same time.
Exactly. And so I said, am I dead? No language, telepathically. And this voice was speaking inside of me, and yet I was immersed in it too. So as I was immersed in this infinite illuminated darkness, it was like the whole thing was the voice. So I was in an ocean of it, and it was speaking inside of me. And I said, am I dead? And the voice said, yes, you're dead. And I said, well, I can't die now. And the voice said, why not? And I said, because it's your time to come home. Come home. I love you. Come home. It's time to come home. I'm like, well, I my parents are suffering. My sister had run away when I was a kid, and when I was 14, and I broke my mother's heart in a serious way, like clinically serious way. And my dad was angry, and it was a bad scene at home. And I said, if I die, my mom's gonna shatter, and she's already shattered, losing two kids in a lifetime.
Mhm.
And in an instant, I was swept across the width and the breadth of the universe and brought to the edge of creation, where I could see Earth like a hologram,
Mhm.
and all 7 billion people on Earth all at once doing their things. Everything you could think a human being can do. I was watching it all happen when 7 billion people doing it. And I could see them all, and they were all covered by a thin covering, like the whole planet was covered by a veil. And the voice said to me, in the way that you now know that I love you, I have always loved you. I love you now, always, and will. I, I can't express at all the immensity of this love. It is all there is. It's larger than this universe. It's bigger than if there are multi-universes, it's bigger than all of the multi-universes put together. It's infinite, and it's always present. And in the way that I love you now, and I'm healed, speaking to me, and you are healed and whole and beloved, and you know you are my beloved. I love every single human that way. Only they can't see what you see because they're under the veil. And I could then see my two parents' faces, and I could see their suffering, and I could see the length of the life to come for them, and the suffering that they would experience without me present. And the voice said, all will be well for them too. They will experience what you're experiencing here. And so you can come home knowing, you can come to me knowing that all's going to be well for them. So yes, they're going to suffer in this length of their life, but you also know that the length of a human life is the wink of an eye. It's that fast. And that's how I experienced it. The length of my life, 21 years, was nothing, and it didn't matter. But I could also see their suffering that they would endure in time. And I said, um, but I haven't gone through the tunnel yet. I haven't come completely home. No, you haven't. I want you to come home. It's your time. Come home to me. And I said, but I haven't gone through the tunnel. Do I have to go? And the voice said, no, you don't have to go. I want you to come, but you don't have to. And I said, well,
But so I'm sorry, but how did you know about the tunnel? Or I mean,
I could see it.
yeah.
I could just see that I could see this opening, and that it was going somewhere, and this somewhere was someplace that I was going to, but I don't know what was there. All I know is that the bliss that
Mm.
was infilling me was a taste of what awaited me. And I said, I haven't gone all the way yet. The voice said, no, you haven't. I said, do I have to? The voice says, yes, I want you to, but you don't have to. I said, well, can I come back to this oneness of being, to this heaven inside, to this place that I'm in now, this utterly beloved place, if I go back to my life? And the voice said, yes, you can come back here. And I said, well, then I choose to. Oh, I should also add, here's something else that happened there, is that because I had and still have a very strong interest in science and cosmology, astronomy, and quantum physics wasn't around so much in the early '80s, at least that I didn't know about it.
Mhm.
But I all knowledge was available to me, and I wanted to know about this, how the universe was made and constructed, and what it was made of. Well, the whole thing. And in an instant, all knowledge about that was what some of my friends say downloaded into me, and I knew and understood all of it. And it was incredible to know so much and not have a brain in the way of my thinking. I could think faster than I could ever think before or since, for that matter. And I said, can I come back here to this oneness of being? And the voice said, yes, you can come back. I said, well, then I choose to live my life. And the voice said, you won't live your life, and sent me back. And as I went back, I was presented with like 10 million entry points into my life. And the way I kind of conceptualize it in my head is sort of a big, huge cable on a suspension bridge where all the individual wires are bound together, creating a single strength, and that each butt end of those cut off was an entry point, and that each of those entry points uh, contained 10 million choices that would become my path through this, but I had a place to enter. And that in the center of this cable was the purity of the divine light itself. And then it faded as it went out to the outer edges. And I sort of saw that I could enter into the center of the oneness of the light, but decided that I liked my sort of bohemian lifestyle a little bit. And so I had been living. And so I kind of went off to the side of it and I entered into this. And the next thing I knew, I was being reduced in size again, crushed like in a car crusher, and being sort of twisted and forced back into my physical body, which I did not understand. All of this was being done to me. And I had no power over this at all. And I was being put back in my body was extraordinarily painful because I was experiencing no pain. I had forgotten about pain. I'd forgotten about suffering. It didn't exist for me. And now suddenly I'm shoved back inside this thing that I didn't understand, and that it was filled with pain. And that was my first sensation, was just pain, and didn't know what it was. And it took me quite a while to sort of surface, come to my consciousness here in this body. And there was all this, I suddenly could hear, and I didn't understand what I was hearing. And my brain was sort of trying to process that information, and my body was moving around. I didn't know what that was. And pretty soon I realized that I was being lifted up or pulled up, and I turned out, came to understand afterwards, my partner, Tim, was pulling me up and screaming at me as my brain came back online. "You were dead. You were dead. You die. I die." He's tears and crying and screaming. And I was looking at him like, what is this? What?
You were kind of relearning yourself at that point.
I was relearning. I was completely disoriented. I didn't know I did not even know who I was. I had no concept of Peter. I had no concept of physical form or breathing or thinking or hearing. All this stuff sort of kind of started back up again. And after a period of time, I began to understand who I was and who he was and where I was and what the circumstance was. And he got me to pull the rope. And I don't know how this happened, but the rope came free in the first pull. We descended. The car was right across the street. We went over. We got our tent. And Tim wanted to get right in the car and fire up the heater. And I was like, no, you can't do that. You got to bring your body temperature up slowly. We got hypothermia. So we put up the tent, had a chimney and a vent, which allowed us to fire the stove in the tent, get in our sleeping bags, bring our temperatures back up, get in the car, warm ourselves.
So while this is happening to you, what did your partner tell you what he was going through and what he was kind of seeing happening to you? Did he see, or was this so fast that he didn't really see much?
He didn't see anything of what happened to me except for that I collapsed and that he believed that I was dead. And we didn't talk much after. He was an atheist, a profound atheist, and so we had an agreement for the entire trip. I would never talk about God, and he would not talk about atheism. And we listened to a lot of jazz. We got along great. We're buddies, but that was the subject we couldn't talk about. And so the next day, sun comes up. It's, we're down off the mountain around sunup, and sun comes up, and we get all heated up, and we drive back toward Montana. A lot of bad things happen on the trip. Car gets totaled. We separate, but we never talked about it. He said to me, he did say to me that I thought you were dead, but I didn't. What was I going to say? Yeah, I was dead. So I didn't say anything.
What did you feel though when you came back out after, like, while you guys are thawing and sitting there? Did you take a moment to say, like, what what did I just experience? Like, what
Oh,
was that?
for like the next 5 years, every moment of my life was like that. What was that? What was that? Where and my experience in the world became immediately that I was inhabiting my body. I knew in an instant that even though I didn't know where I had been and couldn't conceptualize it for myself, I experienced it. And so I carried back with me as much of the experience as my brain would allow, which is kind of a weird thing too. How could I remember what happened to me when I didn't have a brain to remember
That's
what happened to me? And so I pondered that question for a long time. But my
because
most
memory is probably not stored in our brain.
right, exactly. That's my only conclusion, especially about that sort of thing. And my experience was I was in a cartoon world. This world was like a two-dimensional, flat, black and white cartoon compared to the beauty of heaven. And I immediately regretted coming back
You
because,
regret it?
I completely regretted it. I thought it was, and I was angry. I became angry that I was allowed to come back because I wasn't informed. I wasn't told that when I was told I wouldn't live my life, I didn't know what that meant. It's like giving somebody an apple that they've never seen an apple before and said, that's an apple.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know what that thing is. And so I was sort of that way.
So your humanly life that you had lived, you kind of almost forgot while you were experiencing this.
It was all gone. All I once I went through my once I went through my life review of suffering,
The
uh,
cleansing.
the cleansing, it was over. I mean, I knew my parents, but I knew that I wasn't Peter. Peter was like this coat I put on, and to
Mhm.
take the coat off, and that forget the coat. But it wasn't about my experience when I chose to come back. It was about the suffering my parents were going to experience,
Mhm.
and so I had forgotten when I came back. I'd forgotten all about suffering. I'd forgotten all about pain. I'd forgotten. I'd for, I, well, that's about it. I forgot those things. And when I came back, my soul consciousness remembered my experience, but my physical brain couldn't conceptualize it. But what I experienced was non attachment. I was no longer part of the world. And everybody, I left on this theater tour. I was in this theater company, college based thing. We're leaving on this 3 or 4 month national tour. And everybody in my troupe was treating me like I was the same guy. I was not the same guy. I was like in this body moving like a machine. I was like, okay, all right, I have to do this. In order to survive, I have to eat. Oh yeah, I have to go take a leak. I have to sleep. I have to do all these things, but they weren't natural to me. They were all sort of, oh, I got to do that thing now, kind of thing.
So it was almost like you were kind of running a robot, controlling it
It
and doing
was,
tasks just to go on with your day, but that you knew that wasn't it. That was not what life is about, or what life is, or what eventuality is.
or even what I was, and it seemed to me that there were internal things going on too. That most of me didn't come back. Like most of my soul, most of
Mhm.
my consciousness was still on the other side, looking through my eyes. I felt like I was like this was a biological hardware, like somehow.
Homunculism almost.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
and that I couldn't turn my connection off. I couldn't shut off this thing that was seeing me.
Mhm.
And I couldn't shut off looking at this thing. And try as hard as I want to reintegrate into the world, I couldn't do it. And so I went through, well, a long time of secrecy about this, and a
Mhm.
long time of I decided early on that I wasn't going to be able to get away from this thing, and that this was my new life, and I better dive into it and swim with the stream, the river, rather than try to fight against it. And so that's why my whole life changed. I became a different person on a different path.
So along with that, there's a couple of things in my reading and kind of looking into these phenomena is that most people now, it's a little bit easier to communicate with social media, but as you said, secrecy, because you thought people are not going to listen to you. They're gonna say stuff.
Crazy man.
Yeah, I don't want to use that word, but
But it crossed my mind plenty of times.
right. But I know a lot of people that experience such things come back and go through a period of depression, not only because they don't have anybody to communicate with, but they're kind of craving what they had. And so this life seems like very depressing.
Yes.
And the other question I had was, when you were experiencing all of this, did you see anybody? Did you come across anybody, like the typical experiences? Because I know you didn't describe it. So if you could touch on these two questions.
Sure. The second one first, is I was in the presence of all beingness. So everything was there. I lacked for nothing. I didn't need to see any of my ancestors or the people who had died that I loved, because all love was present to me. I was in the presence of the holy of holies, the origin of all, the moving force, the energy, the source, or whatever you want to call it. So it contained the all in all.
Mhm.
I lacked nothing. I lacked no one. And no, I didn't see anybody there. I didn't need anybody. I was in the presence of the divine. But yeah, you were absolutely right. So the next day we drive, the car gets, when I find out how our car gets totaled, you'll have to read the book, but the car gets totaled and we separate. Tim takes a bus back to Bozeman with the skis, because we've been snow caving and backcountry skiing. And I take the other gear that I can carry and I hitchhike back. And so I'm out first thing, the sun up, the following morning, 2 mornings later. And I'm completely confused and I'm depressed, like I can't explain to you. I began a 10-year depression. And I regretted immediately that I had come back, that I had been, tricked, I felt like, and that I was wanted only to go home. I only wanted what I lost. And yeah, and I kept it a secret for 20 years. And so when I got back, I was already meditating. I went to a Catholic high school. The school had near this monastery where they taught centering prayer, and I began meditating 3 or 4 years before this happened. And so I dove into my meditation, and I kind of stayed there for a long time. And I didn't go to graduate school in architecture, which had been my family and my plan since I was like 7 years old. Into the family firm. I instead went to divinity school in order to. I wanted to get a degree in mysticism before I entered the monastery, because I'd met some of the monks, and the monks who were practicing contemplation. I could see the radiance. By the time this part happened. This is a couple years later. I could see the radiance of their being. There were side effects to this, and depression was one of the side effects. Isolation, non-communication. I not only didn't want to talk about it, I didn't have any language to talk about it, and I was fearful that people were going to think I was a nut. And so I kept it to myself, and I decided to go off to school and learn something about mysticism, and maybe find some practices that could help me deepen my journey before I went to the monastery. And then I met a woman and I fell in love, and I got ordained in another denomination because the dean of the students talked me into it and all this kind of stuff. And so my life path. Go ahead. Question. Go ahead.
So when you were experiencing this, did you feel like you had any kind of control as to what the process is happening? Because in the book that I'm writing, I use the term the self-observing universe, where the universe is itself and it brings into existence by observing itself. In other words, these quantum mechanical processes, with the Schrodinger's equation, they exist as a wave of possibilities. And once there's an observation, it chooses one of the many possibilities, kind of reminiscent of the decision you had to make going through these choices of millions of choices, right? So did you feel like, because you were part of this universe, you were also able to kind of control the outcome of certain actions?
Not when I was dead, but that's exactly my experience now. And so it seems to me that um, I saw all of my life potentials when I entered into those, that the choice that I made, that I could have entered into any of them, and I saw all of them all at once, and all the potential decisions that I would make along every single path. And so as I live my life now, that's how I experience it. That I participate. It's not like I've got, like, fate has set me up on this one destiny of life, and oh, I'm supposed to be in this one place right now. This is, well, really, all my choices along my way have brought me to this one place. But I could have made other choices, and other people could have made other choices. So it is sort of like I'm in the experiment, and as I make my choices make manifest my future. But that's always changing because of the choices that I make and the other people make around me. So it is like Schrodinger's equation for me here now. But when I was dead, the totality of the oneness of being, it was all existent all at once. There was no potentialities. All potentialities existed. All of everything all existed all at once. And they weren't separate from each other. They were all this oneness, all contained.
So,
Um,
so, so it was essentially the wave was the thing that you were essentially feeling, all the outcomes simultaneously, all at the same time.
yes.
And
And
only
so,
in the materialistic world are we forced to kind of pick one of these outcomes and
yes,
make it seem like that's the reality. But in real reality, it's all the possibilities all at the same time.
yes,
Or at least that's how our brain makes sense of it and is the only way it could comprehend it.
yes, I'll go with that.
So how did this change your interaction with other people, your sort of approach to life, and your understanding of the meaning of life, and what are we doing here? Is this sort of a gateway towards something that we're on our journey there?
Well, it changed everything about me. I it just changed everything about me. Everything. I can't see without being in the presence of God always. It's like it never goes away. It never shuts off. And so there's a whole bunch of side effects. One of them, especially early on, is I fall in love with everybody. I fall in love with every single person that I met. Just fall in love with them. I could see the radiance of their being. It wasn't like I would just see their physicality. It's like my hands became my eyeballs. And when I kind of touched them or kind of came close to them, I felt the radiance of the presence of the divine inside them. And the same with trees and rocks and plants and flowers and earth itself. It was like being immersed in the whole thing.
You
And
were
this
radiating and feeling the radiation
all the time.
around you.
And so my behavior, I asked my parents. So I kept this a secret from my family too. They were locked out as well. So about 3 or 4 years ago, book came out in 2015. And when I first started talking about this like in 2001 or so, 2002, I started talking about it. Um, my parents didn't believe me. Nobody believed me.
I mean, let's be
Right.
honest, it's something so powerful and remarkable. You can't help but be a skeptic, right?
Of course.
If somebody had told you this, would you have believed it?
No, and it's subjective. I can't prove this. There's
Yeah.
no way I could prove this. And so I said to my dad, who's still alive, I said, so Dad, now that you know this about me, did you see anything different that summer I came home from Montana? He said, well, your mother and I, we talked a lot about it. You were a different person. I said, well, how was I different? He said, not that you weren't before, Peter. Don't misunderstand me, but you were kind. You were kind and compassionate and thoughtful in a way you'd never been before. And so all of my interactions with other human beings became based on the fact that all of us are part of the light itself. And so it's like talks about loving your enemies. That became real in my life. I've had real enemies in my life. Most people who do anything in their life that's worthwhile get an enemy or two or three. And I couldn't help. They were my enemy, okay, but I couldn't help but loving them. I never hated them. And so my interactions with people, well, I became fearless in a lot of things. I'm not afraid of death. My ministry as a church or minister, I got called as a. I hope your audience is okay with me saying this. I became a spiritual ass kicker. That was my job. I got called to really difficult churches where the power dynamics of these churches were uh, dysfunctional and in the extreme. And one of the churches I was in, it was in second generation embezzler second generation of embezzlement going on. This place was totally sick culture. Um, and because I, not really have no faith. Oh yeah, have no faith. Don't have any belief. All of that was taken away from me, and no doubt that God is absolutely real. But I'm not. I got nothing to do with religion. I work in religion, but religion is like the form I use to express the divine experience of my connection because it's culturally contextual.
It's the metaphorical language.
Yes, and so I one of the biggest side effects, I use this example. One day I got a phone call from the local lieutenant in my town, the police department. And he said, Peter, we've got a shooter, a guy with a gun. Not that she hadn't shot yet, but we got a guy with a gun. He's in his apartment with his wife and his baby, and he'll only talk to you. I'm like, okay. So I go over, I get a ballistic vest, I get a ballistic shield. I go into this place with two cops, guns drawn over my shoulders, up the stairs. He's in the bathroom. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm just not afraid. And so that's like the biggest side effect because it gives a lot of freedom for me because now I can make choices that are are less selfish.
But are you also a little bit more less cautious with your life because
Yes,
what's can happen? I end up feeling that extreme.
right. Well, yes and no. I mean, I was a mountain climber, okay, and a
Right.
skier, right? So I'm already a risk taker, but I was always taking calculated risks at that point anyway, trying to set up as much control over the circumstances so I could be in a dangerous situation. But yeah, so I sail. And so I was out sailing one day I sail solo, and I'm out sailing one day by myself in my small boat, and I'm out and I go around this island, and as I go around this island, on the inside it's blowing pretty hard, but not terrible. I go around this island, and it's screaming. I got too much sail up. The boat's starting to, I'm heeling over. There's water coming in, and suddenly I'm like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, and I think, oh, what's the worst thing that could happen? I could drown. Oh, that's not so bad. I get to go home. Totally calm me down. Like, okay, do this and just fun ride. But yeah, I'm not reckless with my life because I know that other people need me.
So you have a purpose that you need to fulfill, so you can't be too reckless.
Right, and I'm about to fulfill my first purpose. My parents are they're just about 90. And I came back so that they wouldn't have to suffer this great loss of a second child. And they're closing in on their end days. And at that point I was thinking to myself, well, okay, it's all done. Job's over. But then in 2015 I died again of this heart attack. And my daughter had just left her abusive husband, and he had gone to war and come back broken, Afghanistan and all that stuff that was going on over there, and just had a baby, and I couldn't who's going to protect them? So I decided the second time around to come back for the sake of my granddaughter, who's now 5. She had just been born that year, so it's been 5 years, and so I'm sticking around. I was still taking risks, but I got to stay around as long as I can for her sake. I made a commitment to her, and plus I know that my life's going to end, and that the length of my life is a wink of my eye, and so that's really given. Even in the midst of my depression, which was long lasting, I figured I'm still going to die. I prayed for my death every day, but
I'm sorry not to put you on the spot, but did you ever feel suicidal or saying, you know what?
I definitely was suicidal, and I was definitely suicidal for a long time. And what stopped me was that I was shown that I was a created creature and did not belong to myself. I did not make myself. And because I did not make myself, and not just Peter, my physicality, but the essence of the soul of my being, I did not create. The thing that I am, the ground of myself, the ground of my being. So I had no right. I have no right to take it.
Makes sense. So one thing that's really unique about your situation is you touched upon it really quickly that you had a second experience. Can we really quickly kind of compare and contrast? Like, did that soul say, or that oneness, let's just call it, say, what? Now you're back again. You have that choice, right?
That's kind of what happened. Very quickly.
Yeah.
Very quickly. I had a coronary. I had 100% blockage in my widowmaker. It's a genetic thing, family thing. And on the way to the catheterization lab, it's an hour and a half drive from my house. So, and I was already outside the golden hour by the time I got into the ambulance. And so a lot of heart damage, died on the way. And as I went up the tunnel, my angel of death, who I recognized, came to me. Time to come home. We love you. It's your time. Let's go. So I went, and I'm like, yeah, I finally get to go home, and without having to kill myself. And then I started thinking about my son, who had been at the urgent care. I love you, Dad. Squeezed my hand, looked me in the eye. Doc had told him to say goodbye, which I didn't know at the time. And
did you have that out of body experience as well, or
I was out of my body and I was up in the tunnel. I was being
you
carried
never saw
away.
the people around you, or
No, I left from inside and went immediately, and so I didn't pop out of my body and see the paramedics in the inside of the ambulance.
Yeah.
I went right into this illuminated dark tunnel, but as I thought about my daughter, as I was going up the tunnel with the angel of death, I thought, I'm not confused this time. I know what's going on. Let me think about this. So I kind of asked permission to can I think about this? And I turned around and I started thinking about my son, not ready for me to go, my daughter, my granddaughter, who needs me. So and meanwhile, the angel's like, come on, it's your time. I turn around from my internal thinking of my family. Angel had receded, comes rushing toward me. Welcome home. And I just turn away and I go back inside my body.
So this might seem like a weird question. Did you feel like you brought back any kind of knowledge or information that?
Oh yeah, I came back with a minuscule amount in comparison to what I had, and so from my point of view, it's a minuscule amount, but from the world's point of view, it's a lot. And the thing that I summarize it this way is that the God is love, and love is the treasure of life. That's it. That's the summary. But I came back with I call them my superpowers to myself. I see people's light inside them. I'm courageous as a result. I experience my future before it happens, moments before it happens on a regular basis. I interfere with radio waves, electromagnetics, in particular frequencies. I came back, I guess, hyper creative. I was a creative kid, but I came back extra creative. I radiate. I've spent my life getting out of the way of the presence of the divine with the intention to follow through on the command that I was given when I was there, which was to speak the message, let the message speak for itself. And so I've spent my entire life trying to figure out ways to do that. But the real way to do it is directly, like the Shakti in Hindu, the giving of the divine. I've spent my whole life trying to become a radiant being so that people can experience it directly and begin their own journey. I am not that thing. Peter is not the light. I'm not the light, but I am a channel for it. And I've been practicing my life to do that. I've given my life away to it.
And have you tried connecting with other people who've had these kinds of experiences?
Oh yeah. Until 5 or 7 years ago, no. 5 years ago, I joined the group called International Association of Near-Death Studies, where I speak at their conferences and at their group meetings. But within that group are people like me, and I found my tribe. I was alone. All of my peers were all dead for hundreds of years. They're all the unitive mystics from the classics of Western spirituality. John Rusbrook and Richard Viola of St. Victor and Catherine of Genoa and all these people who've been long dead. They were the only people who I'd ever encountered who had any sort of experience that was similar to mine. But now I'm meeting lots of people like me all the time. There's estimated 10 to 20 million of us in the United States alone as a result of science, medical science, resuscitation.
Resuscitation, yeah. Well, Peter, I know we could continue talking more and more about this, and perhaps we could have another episode where you could go into more detail about your second experience and tell us a little bit more about that. But this has been truly remarkable, and I'm so grateful that you were able to come on and talk to us about your experience and what that means for life. And of course, I would love to continue having the discussions about what this means about the brain and consciousness. So do you have any last few words that you want to tell the audience about what they should be doing in life and what this has taught you and why your experience was real, and people should be paying attention to these kinds of phenomena instead of kind of hiding under the sand like an ostrich with his head?
Well, in the 1960s, cardiac care came online and resuscitation began, and it spread globally and technology advanced. And now there's 10 million of us in the United States alone. And in an epidemiological study, they don't find, that this molecule and that molecule equals this thing all the time. Epidemiology is sort of like an accumulation of evidence.
Right.
There's an accumulation of evidence now because there's so many of us that it's worth taking a look at, because we're all kind of telling the same story. God is love. And
Right.
and the way out is in. You don't need a near-death experience to connect to the divine. You just need to go inside. You have to go inside, and you have to strip away your false self, your ego, your whatever you want to call it. It's the brain is the only thing in the way between us and God is us. Myself, I'm in my own way. And through practices of meditation or Tai Chi or any of those sorts of meditative breath practices can eliminate or strip away layer by layer the false self, and allows one to be available to the presence of the divine. The last thing is, love really is all there is.
That's an amazing, information to convey. I'm so grateful we had this conversation, and I want to thank you once again. I've truly, really appreciated this, and hope to have you back again in the near future and discuss a little bit more and go maybe into the science of some of these things and have a little bit of a debate, playing the devil's advocate here, no pun intended.
Oh, cool. I'd love that, Jack. It's been great talking to you and to your audience, and I'd love to join you again.
Thank you so much, Peter. You have a wonderful day. And again, I know the people watching it are going to have an amazing time. So you take care.
Peace and love.
And stay healthy.
You too. Stay
Bye.
safe out there.
Bye.
Doc.